Test, test. Okay, we're good. All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Phil Ngo. I'm the project manager of the Ethereum consensus client written in TypeScript called Lodestar. I work at ChainSafe. And here we have a bunch of probably familiar faces in the community here. And thank you for coming to today's session, Ethereum's values and ethos alignment. So I'll give everybody an opportunity just to introduce themselves and just tell us a little bit about what you're working on and like what got you interested in Ethereum. So we'll just go in order, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. Hey all. So my name is Peter. I've been on the Go Ethereum team for almost 10 years now. So I'm one of the boomers in this ecosystem. And I guess just to answer the question, what got me interested in this whole thing, it was mostly decentralized, autonomous, self-organizing systems. So I was always fascinated about having computer systems that just self-assemble and do something without too much intervention.
My name is Nixo. I came to Ethereum, I came to working full-time in Ethereum through staking. I was a staker. I'm now transitioning to working at the Ethereum Foundation. But the thing that brought me in love with Ethereum was the self-sovereignty, and that was like very clear when I onboarded as a staker that Ethereum very much espoused a self-sovereign identity.
Hey, my name is Mark, and I'm a contributor to the Optimism Collective. We're focused on scaling Ethereum through layer 2s, building free software. The reason why I became interested in Ethereum is because I really became disillusioned with the world. I was pretty frustrated with a lot of institutions that I thought were kind of falling behind. They're still built on fax machines. I was kind of like, hey, civilization, we should be able to do better than this. And I started learning about Bitcoin and kind of got into the sound money idea because I was worried about how much debt there was in the world. And then I saw the DAO and I was like, oh, wow, this is really cool. Like Ethereum could be like a platform for these institutions of the future. And then I fell down the rabbit hole and I couldn't stop thinking about Ethereum and just wanted to build and scale it to the world.
Yeah, my name is Ahmad Bitar. I work on the Nethermind execution client. So around 3 years ago, I probably started looking into cryptocurrency in general, and I started doing my own research. And then the more I dove deep, the more I was appalled by Ethereum, about financial freedom, about censorship resistance. And then the way I became a core dev was I got inspired by Péter because I kept seeing him tweeting on Twitter. And this made me think, oh, being a core dev must be like the pinnacle of like technical knowledge in this space. And yeah, this is why I'm here now. So thank you, Péter.
All right. It sounds like we already have a little bit of alignment already. That's a good start. But now to the hard questions. Let's really see here like what people say. We don't know each other's answers. We didn't like rehearse this beforehand. But if you were to describe Ethereum in a sentence, how would you describe it? Anyone first?
Ethereum is incredibly neutral, new financial paradigm.
So when I was thinking about this, I was trying to come up with like a catchphrase, like something really, really simple. So I've got 3 of them. One is unbank the banked. This is like a classic one. People don't really say this one anymore, but it was really popular maybe like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. Another one is, know your counterparty, right? Like I think there's this idea of hardness. Josh Stark, I believe at the Ethereum Foundation, is talking about this. I think that this is a really important property of Ethereum where, you kind of have this property of when you're interacting with someone on the blockchain, the way that they're going to respond. So this assurance is really, really important, and it de-risks certain types of interactions. And I think that's like a huge value proposition of Ethereum. And then the last one is shine light on power structures. So, you know, today there's a lot of walled gardens in the world, and it's really opaque the way that the decision making for these walled gardens works. So a huge value prop to me about Ethereum is that the power structures can be legible on chain. And I think that we should strive to move more and more power structures on chain so that the users can see the power structures and opt into the power structures that they want to, so that we don't just have these opaque walled gardens that people have no say in.
That was longer than a sentence.
I'll allow it.
Yeah, I would say uncompromising, censorship-resistant, permissionless, and decentralized world computer. Focus on uncompromising.
I think for me, the most important thing would be flat, decentralized power structures, in short.
What do you mean by flat?
By flat, I mean I would like not to have power structures at all. I would like to not see hierarchical power structures.
Is no one going to say, like, code is law, maybe?
Nope.
We all know what happened there. Okay, well, you know, that's some, you know, good, interesting perspectives on Ethereum. I feel like we still have, you know, some alignment here on, like, you know, what we're trying to build Ethereum for. I feel like a lot of the times what makes Ethereum different and what makes us very special is because of some of the values that a lot of the contributors, whether it be core contributors or dApp developers or infrastructure builders, the reason why we're here is because we do have some alignment on what we're trying to build here and the properties of what this stack needs to be viable to the true vision of why we're here, which I would assume is the Web3 values, decentralization, accountability, transparency, and such. But if I were to ask you, what is like an one property or the most important or existential threat to Ethereum if this value disappeared, what value would that be? What would make you rage quit and exit the ecosystem because we've lost that property?
I think when you like talk about some of these properties, you end up like tangentially kind of talking about the other ones. And so I'm going to say credible neutrality, but that also refers to decentralization and censorship resistance. And without those things, credible neutrality is those things. Like you were talking about flat power structures, and if my problem with the traditional financial structure, our traditional economic system really is that some people have incumbent power that other people who are newer to the system can't grab at. And I think that if we don't maintain credible neutrality, Ethereum could be more dystopian than the system that we're in currently. Like if somebody can control Ethereum, if somebody has outsized influence in Ethereum, the ability to track people's financial transactions in the way that Ethereum allows could make Ethereum more dystopian than our current system.
I think that's a really good point about how if Ethereum is captured, whether it's its governance or just like the validator set, it could be more dystopian due to the lack of privacy being built into the base layer. So yeah, I would definitely want to rage quit if old money overtook Ethereum's governance.
Old money or new power structures that are crypto native and taking over the system. Either one.
That's a very good point. There's definitely some of those that we have to worry about too.
I think for me, I would say that the most important value is equal access or equal opportunity of access. So essentially what I would like to see is on all the different layers of Ethereum, whether it's L1, L2, platform, dApp layer, whatever, that anybody who figures that they would like to do something on it, they just can without somebody being able to either prioritize or deprioritize them. And maybe we can go into that a bit later, but in short.
Yeah, so when you look at all the properties that are mentioned in this panel, I feel like always it comes back to decentralization. Because if we lose decentralization, we can't guarantee censorship resistance. We can't guarantee permissionless access. We can't be, even if, for example, people working on Ethereum stop being credibly neutral, the decentralization of Ethereum could render them out of the protocol if they wish to, if the protocol is actually decentralized. But decentralization is a very broad word because you have decentralization geographically, you have decentralization in the number of validators, solo stakers, infrastructure. So like decentralization needs to be applied on all aspects, not a single one of them.
I would definitely like to challenge the community into trying to use the word decentralization less so that we can hone in on more on the specific thing that needs to be decentralized. Because when someone says XYZ is centralized, it doesn't really convey much information. We should be talking about the very specific things that are centralized, because systems are made up of many parts. And really, a system is only as decentralized as its least decentralized component. So it's not really useful if you're just saying XYZ, that's centralized. We need to be more specific so that we can share mental models and not just argue past each other in a religious way.
Is there something that you're thinking of that would potentially have a reason to be centralized that's more effective if it was more centralized? Like, is there something that you're thinking of?
Oh yeah, I mean, every time that you decentralize something, it's a cost. And you need to make sure that the cost of that decentralization is worth the benefit, right? So literally decentralizing every single thing in the world, civilization would probably fall apart. So I think sometimes it's good to have decision-making that's centralized. Other times it is better to like design by committee. It kind of depends on what you're optimizing for and like the type of decision that's being made. That's one. I mean, you know, I don't want to get into a whole debate about single sequencers versus based rollups because that's like another one.
So the question was, are you also interested in what would break Ethereum, in my opinion, and what are the problems there? Or should we get there a bit later?
We can talk about that now if you like.
So I guess one very interesting thing is that so what are the values, most important values, and what we could lose? I think one of the things that that could pose the biggest threat to these values is, and I'm guessing this is going on CoinDesk, is democracy, which is kind of a steep thing to say. And what I'm trying to get at is I think in any democratic system, basically it's a popularity contest where you have a very big push from the biggest group of the majority, which in general is probably nice for the overall system, but it might not be nice for individual parts. So I think it's one very important value that I would like to highlight is that I think it's important to have these democratic values not just top-down, rather at all the levels of the system, so that it's not like... so the problem is that if you just go top-down, then we can turn Ethereum into this super nice financial chain, because that's what probably impacts the most people, but I'm not sure that that's the best overall direction for the network.
Yeah, and also like what Mark mentioned, there are obviously trade-offs. We're all probably familiar with things like the blockchain trilemma, where you can only have 2 or 3 properties. And a lot of the times we have to have these debates about like where does Ethereum sort of prioritize its values, because it's not easy to necessarily give up some decentralization for more scalability. So like going into like the future of Ethereum, especially when you're thinking about the end game of Ethereum, we have choices that we have to make, and I'm curious like what is more important to you. So there is this sort of argument about whether chain performance is more important than the distribution of power. When you are trying to get maximum scalability out of something, the natural thing to do is to centralize things. But perhaps Ethereum is maybe better than other blockchains at trying to balance this. So I'm kind of curious, like, is chain performance or distribution of power more important, or are they balanced?
I think that's probably something we'd all agree on, that primarily we would like to see distribution of power. At least me personally, I would gladly sacrifice any performance for it, because usually if you give the power out, it's not coming back. So it's basically a one-way street. And I think that's why it's all these discussions around decentralization versus making certain aspects faster is problematic, because once you made it fast, it's very hard to undo it. It's very hard to argue that, well, we don't want a fast thing. So I think that's why I would probably always choose decentralization.
We're building a really cool piece of technology, and it's trying to address like an age-old problem, which is centralization in our economic system. And the conclusions that we're kind of coming to, or the problems that we're running into, is that as we solve centralization issues, we kind of find that we just push those centralization issues further and further down the stack. And so people start complaining because they're already using the system, and they're like, let's just stop there, let's be okay with that level of centralization. But the thing is, without decentralization, this whole thing is pointless, and we should just move back to centralized systems. And so there's no point to Ethereum if it's centralized, and we shouldn't give up on the idea of decentralization just because we keep encountering these problems, because this is an age-old problem that is really, really difficult to solve, and it's not like we're going to build something in 10 years that just is perfect and solves issues that people have been dealing with for centuries.
Was that a subtext for Beam Chain?
Definitely distribution of power is more important than scalability. I think there's some problems with just going on for sheer scalability, because you don't really know when you've gone too far and have allowed the system to become capturable. So if we just keep, increasing hardware requirements and increasing hardware requirements, we will pass the threshold at some point without realizing it. And an adversary will be ready to strike, and they will strike, and we won't be ready to react, and they can capture the network. So we always have to be very mindful of this sort of attack. I do think that as a community, we have the opportunity to push the boundaries of science and engineering and solve really hard problems to make sure that the power structures stay distributed while scaling. There's some really cool opportunities with, say, new signature aggregation schemes that, the researchers can basically research and kind of invent. And we have the opportunity to bring these to production for the first time and really, develop cutting edge systems that weren't possible before. And this is why I want to contribute to Ethereum. I want to be part of this.
Well, like I already said, I think what the core devs and researchers are working towards is always keeping the distribution of power while maximizing as much as possible what can be done without compromising. The problem is there is some voices in the industry that are pushing to compromise, but I think that we as a community as a whole are pushing against that in a very well manner, and yeah, it's going well. The value of Ethereum will go down if we start compromising.
Just to give one specific example, and I apologize in advance for picking on the project, is, for example, Lido. If you have, let's say you are a staker, whether it's decentralized, centralized, company project, doesn't matter, and it's big enough, then it can be a very, very good network player or ecosystem player. So they don't have to be at all malicious, no single bad intent. Yet still, every time when there's a protocol update being discussed, a research direction, you always have to keep in mind that you have that single big player, and they probably won't, but may want to have a say in it. And these are those structures which, once they evolve, it's kind of hard to get rid of, and it's very, very hard to tell whether something is malicious, not malicious, maybe just doing the best for the investors. It gets murky.
Yeah, that's definitely something to think about. And a lot of the times when we're developing these systems, it's really hard to simulate all the potential side effects, all the second, third degree effects that come from protocol upgrades, as an example. Like, we've learned a lot from the development of the beacon chain and learning more about MEV. As you probably all saw, like, there was a presentation about the beam chain, which aims to fix some of these things that we've learned with the beacon chain. But yeah, it's also, Mark, it's really interesting to hear from you as well as a consumer of things like blobs. You know, there is a lot of debate happening about whether or not we need to increase the blob target max sizes as well, so that we can better support systems like yours and other L2s. But that comes at a cost of potentially some Raspberry Pi staker, which I'm sure nixo is advocating for as well.
No.
No?
No, I don't believe that we should optimize for Raspberry Pi stakers. I think that they're very cool hobbyists, and I love what they're doing. But like, the meme on Twitter is like everybody saying like, "Oh, we need to let people stake on a potato in the Atlantic." But I think it makes sense to have minimum hardware requirements that like approximately equal what you would make in like maybe 6 months in rewards.
Okay. Well, what about the people who may have difficulty getting access to consistent or even excess upload bandwidth? Like, how do you deal with something like that? Like, are we forgetting about these people?
I guess the problem is that once you start looking at bandwidth and things like that, unfortunately, the world is not really equally distributed. So I think it's very, very important to make the system as distributed as possible. But there's always this trade-off that you also mentioned, that if you try to aim to make the validators run on a smartwatch, that's very nice, but is there a value of having 7 billion validators? Probably not. On the other hand, if you do have 7 billion validators, that kind of really, really constrains the other side of the equation of who stores the state, and you kind of give rise to these much more centralized operators. So ideally, you want to maximize decentralization, but not at the cost of centralizing something else, basically.
I am excited to see a lot more conversation about making sure that we have client devs in different locations, though, because I think there's a big blind spot when it comes to bandwidth, because a lot of the world struggles with bandwidth, and I'm not even talking about like developing countries. I'm talking about like little towns in highly developed nations.
Like Berlin?
Like Berlin, yes.
Remote Germany, I've heard.
And so I think that like increasing the number of developers that we have in regions like that, or in like South America, Africa, Asia, is really important, because client devs run super optimized versions of their clients on great hardware or like in the cloud, and they don't necessarily know what the situation is for like home stakers.
At some point, I think that we should, as we hit these bottlenecks with bandwidth, we should, dream bigger and think about improving the infrastructure itself for the entire internet. Because if the bandwidth is going to be the bottleneck, it's going to be really difficult to solve that at the software level once we get to a certain point. Right now, there's a lot more optimizations that we can make, but why can't we go out and do physical things too? I think that could be a really promising path forward.
Ooh, an Ethereum Starlink network. That
Yes.
sounds awesome.
Yes, yes.
Let's take down the ISP oligopolies.
Yeah, exactly. These are the sorts of things that make me really excited about being in the Ethereum community for the next decade plus.
I think we already have some solutions to the bandwidth problems, and I think that probably scaling the blobs before these solutions are implemented would be detrimental to home stakers and solo stakers in a lot of places. But the solutions are out there. We can turn them on, work on them, and then we can scale the blobs to support all the L2s.
So as an L2, I have the incentive to ask L1 for more blobs. And, it's unclear if I have considered the full consequences of this. And this is just the incentives at play. So I am a little bit worried because I know that there's a bunch more L2s coming online that might have a bunch of usage, and we're already close to the blob target. So I do think it's really important for L2s to kind of prove that it's safe. And I think that the base team actually did a really good job of this. They made a bunch of long documents to kind of explain, why it's safe to increase the blob target. And without this actual, these actual numbers, the data that shows that it's safe, it's really hard to make decisions. I think another thing that will make it easier to make decisions is if we had the kind of minimum hardware requirements published someplace. People usually say that the minimum hardware requirements are, a consumer-grade laptop. I know at this point, nodes, the databases are getting pretty big. You probably need an NVMe or at least a solid-state drive. But I, for one, would love it if the community was able to come together and literally make a list that said these are the specific hardware requirements that are required, and then we were able to observe dashboards and see the resource usage of all the different clients, and then we would be able to have conversations about improvements or EIPs, hard forks, and basically how they would impact the resource usage against the stated requirements.
2 terabyte SSD, 16 terabyte or 16 gigabyte RAM, 4 core CPU.
Make it 8.
It's
Make
going to be
it 8.
it's going to be 4 terabytes soon.
Well, I
It
think
won't.
we recommend 4 terabytes, but I think 2 terabytes is a good target.
Just to check on that, we already agreed that we're going to drop pre-merge history after 6 months, of course, with enough solutions to hold the history. Like we have already Portal, we have Error1 files. I don't want to go technical, but we have solutions to keep the history safe and available and accessible for everyone in a decentralized manner. But yeah, so we are not going to raise the bar for the hard drives, no.
Well, it's very interesting that, part of the reason why I wanted to have Mark on this panel is because we wanted to have a little bit better coordination between L1 and L2. As you mentioned, like, the base team has been coming to some of the all core dev calls and, showing us some metrics and trying to convince us that it is safe to raise the blob target and max. But I'm really, curious, is this working for us? Is it nice to actually have somebody who's outside of like L1 being able to, contribute and tell us how we should go about doing things? Is that something that we would love to see more of? Do we want to see more Arbitrum, optimism, advocates, I guess, coming to our all core dev calls? Will that help?
I think that's a very interesting question, and it's very, very hard to answer it, because on one end, on one end, we are always low on manpower. Everything is always low on manpower, so you need the ideas, you need the people to come in and help. That's simply the fact. And if you have somebody who's actually using the system for something, they have these feedback loops to actually be able to provide the numbers. Now, the flip side of the coin is that every problem has multiple solutions, and whenever a business entity will come with solving the problem, they will always solve the problem in a way that prefers somehow their thing. So I think it's super valuable to have the outside contributions, but the challenge is how to make sure that they are actually aligned with the values, and just to make sure that the solutions they present, there aren't better alternatives. So actually, basically what this boils down to is that the more external contributors actually trying to help, and the more different ecosystems or different businesses they operate in, if you get enough people together, then you will have enough friction and enough push and pull, so that the truly good common solutions rise up, and not one or the other that one might prefer.
I think that this question is a lot of political philosophy, to be honest, kind of how you feel about capitalism, whether you think competition is good. We don't want the core development process to be captured. And if there are, businesses that are coming in, they definitely have some incentive to try to capture the process for their own profit. So we always need to be mindful of that. The way that I always think about this is you want to have a distribution of power where the vested interests of each group are at odds. And I think just being very transparent about vested interests is really important, because I think that saying there are no vested interests isn't very honest. I think it's just the nature of business. People have different preferences, different goals, and I think it's more about making those vested interests transparent and balancing the power between them.
I guess one more thing to maybe even more emphasize your point is that it doesn't just boil down to vested interests. I think it also boils down to simply human relationships. So if somebody, let's say I'm working on the guest team, somebody comes with a pull request, and if it's an internal pull request, I'm like, okay, I need to review that. If it's very wild, I'm like, okay, why did they want to do that? There might be a good idea. Whereas if somebody externally tries to come with a pull request, I'm super skeptical. I'm like, nah, not really, I don't know. So you need much, much more convincing from the outside. And I think that's also something that we need to take care of, is to try to be as objective as possible and to keep these personal preferences outside of work.
Right. Is it also safe to say here that everybody is pretty much like on board here with the sort of L2-centric roadmap? This is like sort of the best way forward for us. And because that kind of goes into like a little bit of a question of like, okay, well, what is L2, what should L2s be responsible for, and what should L1 be responsible for? There might be some differing opinions on like how much we should push on L1 and sort of push the rest to L2. Like, would anybody here consider the L2 as like an experimental layer for L1 at all?
On a very general level, I think that the L2 roadmap is great as long as, to tie into this, there's enough competition between them. Because if there's not enough competition and like one of them becomes the de facto way to interact with Ethereum, then it leads to a centralization issue there. But I think as long as we have enough competition between them, I am fully on board with the L2 roadmap.
So what you're saying is we need an L2 diversity page and switch away from base.
No, I think that if L2s are built in a certain way, in an uncompromising way of decentralization and permissionless and censorship resistance, then it doesn't matter which L2 you're on, because you can always transact on it or transact on another. It's just an extension of the main protocol at that point. And this was I think this is the end game this should be the end game for L2s, to reach a point where even if everyone is on the L2, it's not a compromise on any of these things, because it's just an extension of the same values and same properties of the main protocol, which is Ethereum.
I'm definitely a fan of the L2 scaling roadmap, obviously working on an L2. But something that I do think that is really important is that, as the Ethereum community, we continue to put pressure on all of the L2s to, decentralize their power more. So what does this mean? Becoming stage 1, becoming stage 2, and I feel like a lot of the community thought that it would be easier for rollups to get to stage 1 and stage 2. It's actually really, really hard, and we're still working on it. And ideally, we can build free software that allows anybody to spin up a stage 2 rollup permissionlessly. That, to me, is the vision about the L2 scaling roadmap. I also sometimes feel this interesting relationship with L1, because often L2s are asking L1 devs to, work harder, work faster so that we can have these features. I'll always remember this moment in Bogota when Marius actually came up to me and said something like, hey, I'm staying up late working on 4844, why are you not stage 2 already? And that really stuck with me. I think it is important to pressure the L2s into continuing to level up. So yeah, I know that L2 beat is kind of removing stage 0. So I think that's a step in the right direction.
And maybe one point I would like to make is that very often Twitter likes to criticize EF or the Ethereum ecosystem for its direction of this. Why aren't you sharding L1? Why do you go down the L2 road? And I think that's very, very important to realize that they are the flip sides of the exactly same coin. So the end game is to have multiple shards that can more or less atomically communicate with each other. Now, the L1 roadmap attempt originally was to split up the mainnet and then try to fix communication, or sorry, the other way. The L1 was that we try to split it slowly, but keep it communicating with each other, whereas the L2 roadmap was that, okay, we do these hard splits and then try to somehow fix the communication. But the end goal is exactly the same, so it doesn't really matter which path we go down on. However, the L2 might be simpler from a technical perspective, in that you have multiple semi-independent components that can evolve, whereas going down the L1 path would have meant always tweaking this monolith. So it's simply a bit faster and a bit riskier.
Also, as a project manager, like one of the worst things that you could also hear about is like, hey guys, mainnet is down. That's like the worst sentence any one of us can hear. And I can understand like being conservative when it comes to, you know, pushing things like EIPs, especially ones that are potentially consensus breaking if we don't do it right. So do you feel like we shouldn't be taking these risks at L1? Like, you know, Mark says, like there are definitely complaints that they're not necessarily saying you, but in general that L1 moves too slow. We're slow for a reason, and really like we don't want to bring down mainnet. So is like layer 2 a better place for us to test things like Ethereum object format or any other sort of like account abstraction stuff like before we actually get to L1?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great idea, but we do need to remember that it is still real money if these are production networks. I think, you know, having frontier sort of layer 2 test nets with the new features, building end-to-end applications that integrate deeply into the new features is a really good way to make progress. I think for L2s, I think a lot about the go-to-market and kind of the product, because we're trying to onboard the users and be, you know, much closer to the users than L1. So I think more about L2s, you know, benefiting from improving the product rather than adopting the EIPs at this point, because I think that there's so many low-hanging fruits in just better user experience, and our ability to onboard new people. We can do it much more effectively by putting effort into improving the products built on top of the protocol rather than adding features to the protocol itself.
Yes, I think I kind of agree there that the problem is that, yes, in theory, you can experiment on L2 a lot. But in practice, let's say you do account abstraction on some L2, it's very nice, everybody likes it, then you have a lot of companies spend a number of years building something out, and then it turns out, well, this wasn't the best solution. So we're going with a different account abstraction. But what happens with all those people who's invested 3 years of their life in it? And I think from that perspective, evolving the EVM, I would go from L1 towards L2, where you have the guarantees of backwards compatibility. With regard to scaling stuff, go wild. I mean, try everything. And basically, there are no implications if shit hits the fan. So if base tries to do megagas per second and all of a sudden everything comes crashing down, well, the worst scenario is it stops. It becomes slow. It becomes expensive. But there's no other bad side effect. Whereas if they start experimenting with the EVM and they start doing things that are impossible elsewhere, then that's a very nasty vendor lock-in situation.
Okay, just looking at the time, we have like about 2 minutes left. Should probably wrap this up. But before we wrap it up, there is one question that I have for all of you guys, just so we can get a little bit about what you're thinking here. Do you have a North Star or a mission statement for Ethereum? Like, what is our end game here?
I think that wraps around to the first question. I'm going with credible neutrality, which encompasses all those other things, decentralization and...
I'll go with uncompromising. Yeah.
Unstoppable open systems.
Flat power structures. I'm not budging, sorry.
That's okay. I got none in my mind except ETH to the moon, so... thanks everyone for coming to this panel. I think we will start answering some questions, a little bit of Q&A for you guys. I think we got about 10 minutes to do that. Okay, so if you guys haven't already, there is a QR code behind here. If you go to that and you scroll down, you should be able to find a beer cat or link or something like that. It says join live Q&A. So please feel free to ask your questions, upvote the ones you want to get asked, and I'll try to get them here with our panelists. So the first one here that we actually have is, other than finance, what is the most exciting use case of a resilient, decentralized world computer, in your opinion?
I struggle with this one, and I'll give an answer that's not like totally fangirling over Ethereum, because in every case of there being a promise to connect a provider directly with consumers, there always ends up being middlemen who like shove their way in. I read a really good expose on OnlyFans on Reuters, where like the whole promise was to directly connect sex workers with consumers, and within this platform, they had essentially recreated the pimps. They had recreated pimps, like, and it wasn't directly clear. So I'm very excited by the idea of connecting consumers with protocols permissionlessly in ways that like are governed by code. But I am very wary of the idea that we can prevent these middlemen from coming in. So I think that we have to be very critical of any exciting use cases that come in.
I think for me, the most exciting would be the platform itself. So finance is kind of super boring to me. And what I really like, for me, what's kind of important is that anybody can dream up their little constructive project and be able to deploy it and interact with the people. And it just, I think this freedom to just do whatever is the single most important property.
One use case that I think is really important is just, like some sort of open and unstoppable social network or kind of like news information aggregation site where people have the right to just kind of like speak their mind, to publish different ideas in kind of an open way where it's difficult to fully censor anyone, and applications can be built on top of this with like their own filtering mechanisms and their own censorship mechanisms. But like the base layer kind of has to be open to allow people to kind of say whatever they want. And this sort of model can kind of be like a checks and balances on any sort of walled garden or incumbent power structure that becomes too powerful in the world.
I'm so excited about the idea of like Farcaster came online, and the idea of being able to pull your data from one front end to another really, really excites me, because I can't tell you how many people I've met who like got kicked out of Facebook and lost all their photos because for some reason they were storing all of their stuff on Facebook. But with that comes a really important feature of needing to have civil resistance, because in recent months we've seen a huge drop-off from Farcaster because bots have been onboarded and there was a lot of incentivization to be on Farcaster, and so it's gone downhill. But like that is also a really exciting thing, because social media rules so much of our life and like impacts our behavior and is used to manipulate the way that we interact with each other, and we've seen it has a lot of influence in doing so.
Totally. Sometimes I wonder if the algorithm is thinking for me.
I will say from my perspective, one of the biggest centralizing points that we should try to work out and figure out how to get off of is GitHub. I'll give you an example very quickly of just one of our developers who was actually flagged at one point for spam, and his account disappeared overnight. So all of the PRs, all the contributions, everything, his entire history and comments, all the context that we had to his work was gone overnight.
I've been kicked off of GitHub 3 times,
Oh, congratulations.
but I got it back every time.
I don't think it's a contest though, but I mean, just finishing up here, like, they could basically just cancel you. And that is one of my biggest worries, is that we're so reliant on a system like GitHub, which is a United States entity. So it's kind of concerning that somebody can just be wiped off the face of the digital earth that easily.
Totally. I mean, getting wiped off of GitHub, that could have catastrophic consequences for someone's life. That's like, you know, many people's resume is their work that they did on GitHub. And, you know, if they're an admin to a project that is like a, you know, a blockchain project where there's real money being stored on the system, it could like be a way to cut off the developers from being able to roll out a new release and upgrade the blockchain. So that is definitely a big problem.
I feel like we should muscle through the rest of these questions, like one person per question maybe, because I don't want to like spend too much time on one question.
Okay.
We have a lot of questions.
Yeah, next question. I'm guessing this one is for Peter. Do you still consider Geth's 52% majority a big risk for Ethereum stability?
Okay, I don't really want to waste too much time on it. I would like to challenge that statistics. As far as I'm aware, Nethermind has the majority validators nowadays, so I think it's kind of moot. We just, yeah, I don't think it's that relevant at the current time.
Would love to see people using Bezo, Aragon, and Wrath as well.
All right, next question. Peter, you're popular today. Peter spoke of democratic values on Ethereum, everyone having an equal say, but doesn't this risk designed by committee? Should everyone have a say in how Geth is built?
Actually, I was making the exact opposite point. I don't want everyone to have an equal say. I would like everyone to have an equal opportunity to contribute to Ethereum, but I don't think everybody having an... So I would like everybody who works on the same level have an equal say in things, but I would not like people operating on different levels to have a say in layers which they are not familiar in. For example, I'm an L1 dev. I have opinions about what Base could do, but I don't really feel confident about giving them pointers that do it like this, do it like that they probably know better.
Flat structures aren't truly flat structures. They're just the ultimate meritocracy. They're messy, but they're the ultimate meritocracy.
All right, next question. Which aspects of Ethereum has a greater centralization risk than others right now?
Builders.
The foundation.
Good take.
Yeah, relayers, EPBS.
Yeah, definitely the MEV supply chain.
Yeah, the block production pipeline is pretty ripe for capture today. We're even starting to see relayers and block builders vertically align, which is a little bit concerning too. Okay, next question is, what is wrong with staking ETH on Raspberry Pi when you can literally run hundreds of validators on a single RPi device, recently verified by projects such as Web3 Pi?
Nothing. There's nothing wrong with staking on Raspberry Pi, and I super encourage the people who are experimenting on that to experiment more. But I do think it's a little ridiculous to like expect all of the core devs to tailor towards a Raspberry Pi. I think it comes on both sides. Like the people who are hobbyists who are working in Raspberry Pis should be trying to optimize their systems to work with core devs, and core devs should be working with them. But like, I'm so sick of the Twitter meme of like the potato in the Atlantic.
Do you see centralization risk in development of the core protocol, with EF being a bottleneck? Ooh, hot takes.
I don't think EF is a bottleneck. I think EF researchers are churning out specs that are semi-impossible to keep up with. So bottleneck, definitely not. Centralization risk, okay, that's not a 10-second answer, sorry.
All right, thank you everyone for your time. Thank our panelists for coming and spending some time with us today. And have a good DevCon. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.